everything with the unit's very cryptic. And so you go through like a 40-day selection process, which is pretty wild. And then you go back to your unit and you get orders to come to the year-long training. And they basically give you like this super random email that's just like, show up at this parking lot at this time. Okay, you show up and you're hanging out in this parking lot. And there's a couple guys I recognize from my selection class that are them. And then Shannon pulls up. 2013, we both ended up going to Selection 4 and getting invited to the year-long training course to be in a pretty unique special operations unit. Combines intelligence folks with special operators. Still one of the few units that not a lot's known about, so I'll be a little bit cagey and not talk too much about that unit. It's kind of funny because when you go and you do the for the book, you do like the publication review stuff.
Yeah.
And like the CIA is pretty cut and dry. Like, hey, you can say what you did at the CIA. You know, like they gave me like one or two things I couldn't say, and then like DOD's like, you know, pages of like, don't say this, don't say that. So yeah, but we both ended up there at that unit, and so we both recognized each other right away. But we were,
Can I ask questions about that unit?
Sure. Yeah.
Just how did you get recruited into that?
So I was fortunate that on one of my deployments, I ended up working with them. So I kind of got exposed to what they were doing. And I already kind of gravitated towards that intel world. And so that's kind of where my head was. And I wanted at some point, I'd kind of set my sights on going to the agency next. Again, because I was interested in the intel side, but also I kind of wanted to be like a voice of reason, I guess is the way you could put it. Like somebody who had been there on the ground to actually like give real information to decision makers so that we didn't ever get involved in a disaster like Iraq again. That was kind of like my long-term goal. But I had an opportunity to work with some guys from that unit, and they had a pretty unique mission at the time. They were part of one of the task forces that was specifically going after just the foreign fighters that were coming across the Syrian border. My team was on the Syrian border, so we were working on that 05, 06 timeframe. And a couple guys came out and they had a lot looser rules than we did, and they had a lot more money than we did. And they were like, yeah, but we're in the Army. And I'm like, wait a sec, like, so who are you? Because I was like, man, I thought I knew everybody. Like, who are you guys? And they wouldn't even tell me, you know. And they were like, hey, email this guy when you get home, and we'll talk to you later.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that unit was until way after I was out.
Yeah, it's not. We don't really advertise. I mean, the unit doesn't advertise that much. They kind of find who they want. I think we've done some more like blanket emailing of like the whole Special Forces community or the whole NSW community now to kind of get more guys, because, you know, it's cool to have a super secret unit, but you still need people to like know to come to try out for it. So I think they're a little bit more upfront nowadays about getting guys to come try out for selection. But I didn't hear much about it at all. So that was my first exposure. But really, I didn't plan on going to the unit until we pulled out of Iraq the second time, because I had always just wanted to stay on an ODA. Loved it. I went from weapons to intel, and then I became a warrant officer. And so as we were leaving Iraq, I was like, crap, man, like now, are we going to enter the peacetime army now? You know, I was like, am I going to have to go sit on a staff somewhere now that I'm a warrant officer? And luckily that unit takes warrant officers. Like, you can go try out. So I was like, you know what? I want to stay in the game. I'm going to go try out for this unit now. And so luckily Shannon had done 3 Iraq deployments, and she had just done an Afghanistan deployment too. And so she had tried out for the unit. So we ended up in the same class.
So would you guys have been doing, or maybe we're doing, the same job description?
Well, her job was a little more technical than mine because she had the SIGINT qualification. She had the language skills, and then Shannon was also a qualified humanter. So she was proficient in all 3 of those.
Can you go into a little more detail on human and SIGINT? Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for the audience.
Yeah, so she was like, if you look at her Navy job, it's cryptolinguist technician. And then interpretive, which means her entire job is cryptology. So intercepting signals, radio signals, cell phone, cyber. There's a cyber aspect to it as well. So she was trained in that. But then she had the interpretive. She had the language skills as well. So she specifically targeting the Middle East, Iraq, you know, those types of Arabic-speaking countries. That was her target language.
So SIGINT, for those listening that don't know what that is, that's signal intelligence.
Yeah, signals intelligence, exactly. Yep. So that was supposed to be her main job. When she was over in Iraq, because of basically demand, she ended up just kind of fumbling her way into source operations because she understood the Iraqi dialect so well that a lot of the guys down there at the NSW task force that she was working with, so the intel enablers and some of the SEALs that were ASOC guys, they realized their terps sucked. because we had Terps from other parts of the Middle East. They're having a really hard time. And so they were constantly having Shannon check those Terps work. And so she ended up getting in on the human aspect really early on. And then this is around the same time, I think, where as a fighting force, we were having an epiphany that there was a whole other side of the population that we weren't talking to, because the Middle East is just so segregated between men and women. Mm-hmm. We were missing the entire, like, literally female perspective, and women in that culture aren't really regarded as anything, but at the same time, they're everywhere, you know? So like you have women that are in the room with all the same bad guys we're going after. And so Shannon started working with a lot of the women's sources, because the women's sources wouldn't come in and they wouldn't talk to men.
So human, for those that don't know.
Human intelligence.
It's human intelligence.
Yeah. So that's how she found her way into that. And then between one of her deployments, ended up going to one of the human courses to be, you know, officially certified and blessed off on to run source operations.
So you guys are at selection for a special missions unit. I can't say the name. I won't say the name. But I mean, you saw her again.
I did.
I mean, so what?
Yeah.
What's your pickup line?
It was pretty wild. Well, she helped me. Everything with the unit's very cryptic. And so you go through like a 40-day selection process, which is pretty wild onto itself. And then you go back to your unit and you get orders to come to the year-long training. And they basically give you like this super random email that's just like, show up at this parking lot at this time wearing business casual or something like that. So you're like, okay, you show up and you're hanging out in this parking lot. And there's a couple guys I recognize from my selection class that are there. And there's some other people who maybe were in a class before us or behind us that are there. And then Shannon pulls up and we make it's like out of a movie. We make eye contact. We both I think we recognize each other. And she's looking at me and she backs into this other car. She taps the fender of her car on another car. And she's like, ah. And so I just go over there and I'm like, hey, I saw that car jumped out and bit your bumper. Like that was my pickup line there, you know. And then we both realized we were who we thought we were, like, you know. And then we were both still in training, so we had a lot going on for that first year. But you know, from that moment on, we were pretty much inseparable.
Can you talk about the selection at all?
Not really. There's all the typical stuff that you'll have in a ruck-based selection. So they also kind of follow the same pattern that like SFAS or Delta Selection follows. Okay. Where they're seeing how you perform individually. I'd say this one you're even more isolated in, because they're recruiting from a population of soft guys that have already kind of been tested. You've already kind of have a decent reputation in your community to get the invite. So they know that you can kind of perform well in a typical team environment. And so they take you and they're going to isolate you and they're going to have you do a lot of the typical land nav stuff. But then there's a ton of other challenges that even with like some of the best intel going into it, like you just don't anticipate. And I don't want to ruin for anybody, but by the time I went, I had been in the Army for like 12 years, been to combat, been around pretty much every unit here and there. And there was stuff in that selection process that I was like, I did not see that coming. Like that was really surprising and very well done too. So a lot of resources go into it. They challenge you in a bunch of different environments, and it's 40 plus days, and you don't really know when. They give you like a week time frame of when it'll be done. They'll be like, yeah, you can tell your unit you'll be back, you know, between this day and that day.
Wow.
So yeah.
What's the attrition rate like?
It's pretty big. It's pretty big. There's classes where there's like one or two guys, you know, that make it. My class wasn't that way. I think we had 10 of us that made it through. It's kind of like a scaled thing. You go to a standard military base initially, and that's where you do all your PT tests, psych eval, and that's one of the first places where they're actually going to put you, like, they're going to polygraph you as well, because anybody that's in the unit has to have a TSSCI. And so there's a lot of guys that the psych eval and the poly, they're gone, you know, and then they take you off to a much more isolated place. And then they take you to another isolated place. And by the time you're all done with it, it's kind of interesting. You don't know how many guys make it through your selection class because of the way they end selection. There's like a final event you do, and then you go before a board, and then you just kind of get put on an airplane. And so you don't really know.
They shuffle you from the board to the airplane.
Basically. Yeah.
Holy
so
shit.
You know, like there's one other guy maybe that you're in the van with, and you also don't really introduce who you are fully.
This sounds like the place I always wanted to go.
That's what I said. No,
I've
when I was
been
there,
looking for this
I
place
was like, this is
forever.
pretty
I
rad.
found you've
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very unique place. It takes a long time to get into it, but it's a really cool place.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.